The chapel is colder inside than it is out in the rain. That's the first thing the tailor notices, though he probably doesn't want to admit it. Outside there's wind, wet grass, old graves, and the dark shape of the hills beyond Loch Awe. Inside there's stone that has held the damp all day and now gives it back slowly, like the whole place has been breathing cold onto itself since sunset. He sits with his back close to the wall because that's what a man does when he's trying very hard to look braver than what he feels. Cloth is in his lap, needle between his fingers, candle beside him burning low and nervous in the draught. Every little sound has too much room around it. The pull of thread, the scrape of the boot against the floor, rain ticking against what's left of the roof. Somewhere outside, water runs off stone and drops into the weeds with a steady little patter that almost sounds like footsteps until he makes himself stop listening. He has been told the chapel is haunted. That's why he's here. Some fool wager, some bit of pride, some old challenge that probably sounded easier in daylight, with other men around and a cup in somebody's hand. Spend the night in the chapel, they said. Keep sewing. Prove the stories are nothing. That's always how old folk tales get a man in trouble. Somebody tells him a place is dangerous, and instead of thanking them for the warning, he decides to make a public demonstration of his stupidity. So he sews, the candle drips, the rain keeps on. Then the ground in front of him moves. At first, it just seems wrong. That's the best way to say it. Stone should stay stone. Dirt should stay settled. The dead should stay where they are put. But something in front of him rises where nothing ought to rise, and before his mind can dress it up with a better explanation, he sees the hand. Large, dark, coming up first before the rest of the thing. That is when the tailor forgets the wager. He forgets the cloth, the needle, the men who laughed him into being there. He runs for the door because the door is the only part of the chapel that still makes sense. Door means out. Door means air. Door means the path, the rain, the graves, and anything else except being trapped inside with whatever is climbing up from the floor. He reaches it, but barely. Behind him, something strikes the stone. A hard scrape of claws against the place where his body had been just a breath before. By morning, the tailor is alive, and the chapel has a mark. That is the part people remember. The devil missed the man, but touched the building. He left something behind that people could point to later, something in the stone that made the story easier to tell and harder to laugh away. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist. And today we're talking about the devil's hand and the old fear that something evil could touch the ordinary world and leave a mark behind. The Devil's Hand isn't one tidy handprint in one little story. It's the name we're using for a whole family of old legends where a strange mark gets blamed on the devil, or something close enough to him that people didn't care to split hairs about it. In one place, it claws into stone. In another, it's a paw burned into a wooden table. Somewhere else, it black marks on a church door, hoofprints in snow, or maybe a mark on a human body that frightened people and decided it meant guilt. The shape changes, but the habit stays the same. People find a mark they can't easily explain. They look at where it is. They remember what happened nearby, or what they were told happened there. And sooner or later the mark gets a name. At Kilnure near Loch Awe in Argyll, the story sits inside a ruined chapel. The place is connected in local tradition with St. Columba, old burials, and the kind of weathered stone that already makes people lower their voices a little bit. Near the doorway into the nave, there's a mark in sandstone that tradition calls the devil's hand. Some descriptions make it sound more like claws or toes than fingers. Some mention nails. Either way, the story knows what it wants that mark to be. Like the tale in the beginning of our episode, it brings in a tailor, because apparently old folklore never met a tailor it didn't want to send into danger after dark. In the story, the chapel was believed to be haunted, and the tailor accepted a wager that he could stay there alone all night. He settled inside with his sewing, and midnight came on. Then a huge hand appeared out of the ground in front of him, followed by a dark figure it belonged to. That was the end of his brave little evening. The tailor ran for the door. He got out just in time, and the devil's claw struck the stone instead of him. That detail is why the story works. The man escapes, but the chapel keeps the mark. People can stand near that doorway later and say, the thing came close enough to touch. A similar story turns up at Saddell at Kintyre, where the ruins of Saddell Abbey are tied to another huge spectral hand. In that version, the hand chases a tailor from the abbey towards Saddell Castle. He reaches the castle, gets inside, and the hand leaves its print near the door. Again, we have the tailor, the religious ruin, the chase through the dark, and the mark left at the point of escape. Kirkby Lonsdale gives us a different kind of devil story. The Devil's Bridge there crosses the River Lune, and the legend is built around a bargain instead of a handprint. According to the story, an old woman needed to cross the river because her cow had wandered to the other side. The devil appeared and offered to build her a bridge, but he wanted the soul of the first living thing that crossed it. Now that's classic devil business. Help arrives right when somebody needs it, and the price is tucked into the wording. The woman catches the trick before it catches her, though. Once the bridge is finished, she throws food across it, and her dog runs over first. The devil gets the dog instead of the woman's soul, which is clever, though it's a pretty rough little ending for the dog. That bridge legend belongs here because it shows how a place can hold a devil's story even when there isn't a handprint at the center of it. The bridge gives the bargain somewhere to live. People can point to the river and to the stone arches and the crossing itself. The story turns a practical structure into a warning about wording, debt, and offers that arrive too neatly. Lublin in Poland gives us the devil's hand in a courtroom. The legend belongs to the Crown Tribunal, which became the highest court for the nobility of Lesser Poland near the end of the 16th century. The story is usually tied to the year 1637 and to a poor widow who brought a case against a wealthy nobleman. The human judges ruled against her. In the legend, they'd been bought off, and the widow cried out that even devils would judge her more fairly. That night, the tribunal rider heard carriages outside. Strange judges came in wearing crimson robes. They ordered the courtroom open, sat at the presiding table, and heard the widow's case again. Their faces gave them away if you looked closely. The sharp features, the dark eyes, the hair hiding horns, all of it told they were devils dressed up like noblemen. This time, the widow won. Then the presiding devil laid his hand or paw on the table and burned the mark into the wood. That's a nasty little story in the best folkloric way. The devil is still dangerous, but the human court has become so crooked that hell looks organized by comparison. The burned paw gives people a plain object to remember, a table where devils supposedly gave the poor woman the judgment men refused her. Then there's Blythburgh in Suffolk, where the mark belonged to a storm, a church, and a black dog. Holy Trinity Church stands near the River Blythe in Marsh Country, and the local legend takes place on August 4th, 1577. During Sunday service, a violent storm struck. The story says a great black dog burst into the church, rushed through the congregation, and left long black scorch marks on the wooden door. Those marks became known as the devil's fingerprints. In East Anglia, the black dog is usually tied to Black Shook, the great spectral hound of roads, coasts, churchyards, and lonely places. At Blythburgh, the frightening part is that the creature enters the church itself. The door, the storm, and the black marks give the story something people can still look at. But Blythburgh also gives us a useful complication. Some researchers have suggested those marks may have been made on purpose, with a candle or taper as protective burns. So the same door can carry two readings. One story says something evil got in and left its mark. Another says people marked the door because they wanted to keep evil out. After 100 years, a warning and a protection mark can look close enough to confuse people. Now, the devil's footprints in Devon spread the idea across the whole landscape. In February of 1855, after snow fell across parts of East and South Devon, people reported hoof-like tracks running through the fields, the gardens, the rooftops, and places where no ordinary animals seemed likely to go. People argued about what made them, animals, or the weather, or pranksters, or stranger explanations. They all had their turn. The story stayed because the image was hard to shake. Something had crossed into the countryside in the night and left a trail behind it. So the devil's hand reaches farther than a hand. A claw near a chapel door says something nearly caught a man, and a bridge says a bargain was made and dodged. A burned paw on the tribunal table says bad judgment had become bad enough for the devil to have to answer it. And black marks on a church door say something crossed into a holy place during a storm. Then we have to turn the picture around because old marks weren't always blamed on evil. Some were made to keep evil away. Historic buildings can carry protective marks near doors and windows, the fireplaces, the beams, and other places people treated as vulnerable. Today they're often called witch marks, though that name can be misleading. Many of those marks were made against witches and spirits and the evil eye, or fire or lightning, or whatever else people feared might slip into a building. The ugliest version of the devil's mark sits on the human body. During witch trials in places like Scotland, England, and New England, accused people could be searched for a physical sign that they'd made a pact with the devil. It might be called the devil's mark, or the private mark, the witch's teat, or an insensible spot. In practice, fear could turn almost anything into evidence: a mole, a wart, a scar, a birthmark, or a skin tag, or a patch of skin that supposedly didn't feel pain. A mark on stone can become legend. A mark near a fireplace might be protection. On a court table, it might carry a story about corrupt judges. But a mark on the body can put a person in danger. That's the difference we need to keep in mind before we start talking about how people read these signs and what they did once a mark had a story attached to it. Here's the plain way to think about it. People didn't read a mark by looking at the mark alone. They read the mark and the place together. A scratch on a fence rail might be weather or animals or a tool slipping. Put that same scratch on a church door after a storm, and now people start asking different questions. That's why location matters so much in these stories. A mark near a door says something about entry. A mark near a hearth says something about the center of the house. A mark on a bridge says something about crossing. A mark on a table says something about what happened at that table. And a mark on the body, once fear gets hold of it, can become dangerous very fast. Old folk belief paid attention to the working parts of a place. Doors opened and closed. Windows let in light and air. Chimneys carried smoke out. Fireplaces held heat and ash, cooking, and family life. Bridges carried people from one side of danger to the other. When it came to tables, they held food and money and vows and papers, court business, and family arguments. So when a strange mark showed up in one of these spots, people didn't treat it like a random damage. They read it as a sign of what that place did. That's where protective marks come in. People marked the places that worried them. They scratched signs near doorways. They burned small marks into beams. They carved symbols near fireplaces. And they hid shoes and bottles and iron, written charms and bones, and other things in walls, under floors, near chimneys, and all sorts of openings. To somebody tearing on an old wall today, they may look like junk, but to the person who placed it there, it may have been house protection. Some of those marks were simple. A daisy wheel or hexafoil looked like a round flower made with a compass. In older tradition, that turning pattern could confuse or catch a wandering harm. Overlapping V marks were often tied to the Virgin Mary and used as a call for protection. Crosses, circles, grids, taper burns, and repeated lines could all do the same kind of work, depending on the place and the people using them. These weren't decorations, they were little guards. That's where people can get turned around. A mark blamed on danger and a mark made against danger can look almost the same after a few hundred years. A burn mark might be remembered as claws, or it might be the remains of a candle mark placed there on purpose. A scratch near a door might look eerie now, but it may have been somebody's way of saying, "Watch this entrance. This house is guarded." So you don't rush to name that old mark, because strange doesn't have to mean hostile. Old doesn't mean cursed. A weird sign in an old house may be nothing more than protection that outlived the people who understood it. Somebody before may have loved that house so much and they wanted to mark the places where they thought trouble could get in. Shape still matters, of course. A hand suggests reach and pressure, or a claim on someone, or touch. A claw is more about scraping at a barrier. A hoof feels especially wrong when it turns up where no hoof should be. A paw can pull in dogs or hunting or warning or tracking and the fear of being followed. The shape doesn't have to be perfect. Once people give it a name, that name teaches everybody else how to look for it. Timing changes things too. A mark found after a storm has a different feeling than one found during ordinary sweeping. Hoof prints in fresh snow after a strange night will get more talk than prints in mud behind a pasture. A stain noticed after a death can get pulled into the story of that death, even if the stain was already there. People don't only ask what the mark is. They ask when it showed up, who saw it first, and what had just happened. That's how rules grow from marks. Don't sleep in a place people already warned you about just to prove you're brave. Don't make bargains when the wording feels a little too good to be true. Don't scrape old signs out of a house until you know what they may have been there for. And don't treat odd marks like it's a curse. A lot of folk practice is just turned into behavior. And behavior tells you what people thought needed guarding. But then we get to the body, and the whole thing turns mean. A mark in stone can be left alone. A burn in a beam might be studied, or a scratch in a door becomes a local tale. Any kind of mark on the skin can be used against the person carrying it. In witch trial culture, a mole, a wart, a scar, a birthmark, all of them could be called a devil's mark once accusers had already decided what they wanted to find on the person. That is the cruel side of sign reading. A family marking a doorway is just trying to protect their home. But a crowd naming a mark on somebody's body, they're just looking for someone to blame. Those two things don't belong in the same moral basket. One guards a place, and the other can ruin a life. So when you come across a strange mark, the first question isn't, what monster made this? Ask where it is. Ask what this place was used for. Ask whether the mark was meant to warn, guard, remember, or accuse. Ask what gave the mark its name, and who had to live with the result. That's the practical lesson underneath the devil's hand. Marks can protect a house, warn a community, hold a story, or harm a person. The danger begins when people stop looking carefully and let fear do the naming. The ugliest afterlife of the devil's mark wasn't on a church door or an old table. It was on the body. Once people believed the devil could leave a sign behind, that belief didn't stay safely attached to stone or wood or snow. It moved on to skin. And that's when a strange mark stopped being a story and became dangerous. In Scottish witch trials, the devil mark could be treated as one kind of evidence. The belief was that the devil marked a person when they made a pact with him, almost like a twisted version of baptism. Searchers looking for a visible blemish or a place in the body that supposedly didn't feel pain, whether it was a mole or a wart, or maybe even eczema, it could become part of the case once an accusation had been made. The search itself was humiliating. Accused people could be stripped partly or completely naked, and their bodies were examined and pricked with pins. This wasn't done in private and with any real care for dignity. It could involve ministers and elders, interrogators and local officials, and sometimes professional witch prickers who traveled from place to place claiming they knew how to find the devil's mark. That's the part that makes this more than superstition. A local rumor could become a formal search. A search could become a mark. A mark could become evidence. And evidence could help push a confession, especially when the accused person had already been held and questioned, watched and deprived of sleep, and told them that the devil had marked them. Once people in authority said they had found the sign, the accused had very little room left to defend their skin. The pricking was supposed to find a place that didn't bleed or hurt. Human bodies don't respond the same way in every spot. Fear could change how people react. Shame changes how people react. Exhaustion might change how they react. And when the person doing the test already expects to find the devil's mark, the test is no longer a search for truth. It's a way to make the accusation look physical. Now, some witch prickers were ordinary local men given the job during an investigation. Others made a profession out of it. During the larger Scottish panics, a handful of professional prickers traveled between communities and were paid for their work. That means the devil's mark became part of an ugly little trade. Fear created a service, and the service needed results. The fraud at Peebles in 1649 and 1650 shows how dangerous that could get. A pricker named George Cathy was involved with Janet Coutts, an accused woman who named other suspects he would then examine. The fraud was eventually detected, but only after dozens of executions had taken place. That is what happens when a community gives too much power to someone who claims he can find evil by pressing metal into skin. There was also the strange case of Mr. Patterson, another pricker who turned out to be a woman in disguise named Christian Cattle. That detail almost sounds like it belongs in a farce until you remember the setting. People were being accused and searched, and possibly sent towards death while someone moved through the system under a false identity. The devil's mark had created a role that could be performed, sold, trusted, and abused. Over time, Authorities became less confident in this kind of evidence. Confessions made under torture came under question, and pricking for the devil's mark came to be seen as fraudulent. After the major panics of the 1660s, procedures tightened. That didn't undo what had already happened, but it shows that even in the period itself, people eventually had to admit that a mark on the body was a dangerous thing to treat as proof. The harm didn't end with the courtroom, though. An accusation could follow a person even if they weren't executed. It could damage their name, their family, their place in the community, and their safety later on. Once someone had been searched for the devil's mark, the story could cling to them. People might remember the charge longer than they remembered the outcome of the case. That is why the devil's hand stuck in such a hard way. A mark on a building can scare people, and a mark in the snow might start an argument. Back to that courtroom table, and it could become a legend about bad judges. But as we've seen, a mark on the body can give frightened people permission to hurt someone else standing right in front of them. When the old stories point to stone or wood or doors, we can study them from a distance. When they point to the skin, we have to be more careful. The old fear wasn't only that the devil could touch the world. The greater danger was that people believed they could find his touch on another person and then act like the mark had already told them the whole truth. After all that, the rule is simple. Don't let fear name the mark before you've looked at it clearly. We've seen marks blamed on the devil, marks made to keep evil out, and marks used against real people when fear got ugly. So if a strange mark shows up in your house, the work begins with steady eyes and common sense. First, check the ordinary reasons. Water damage or smoke, settling in wood or animal scratches, maybe it's bad paint, a slipped tool, a child with too much time and something sharp in their hands. The devil doesn't need credit for every dent in a wall. And if a mark is in a church, a cemetery, a historic building, or a rental property, or somebody else's house, keep your hands off it. Take a picture if that's allowed, make a note, leave it where it is. Old marks don't belong to us just because they make us curious. But if the mark is in your own home and you've checked the ordinary causes and it still bothers you, this is where the spell work begins. It isn't you declaring war on a stain or a scratch or a burn or a dent. It's a small piece of protective work to steady the room and the energy in the house, to guard the entrance, or to put the house back under the care of the people who live there. For this working, you're going to name the mark plainly, clean around it, set a boundary at the doorway, and bring the room back into ordinary use. And what you're going to need is a notebook or a piece of paper and a pencil, a soft cloth or small brush, a house key, a small iron nail or something iron, horseshoe, or just a simple piece of iron. Get a bit of chalk or brick or pencil lead, and a white candle if you do candle work. Write down exactly what you see and keep it plain. Write, there is a dark mark near the back door. Write, there is a hand-shaped stain at the cellar stairs. Don't write, the house is cursed. Don't give fear the first word. Then write where it is. The door, the window, the hearth, the cellar door, the hallway, wherever it is. Location matters in this kind of work. A mark near an opening speaks differently than a mark behind a chair in the middle of a wall. So dust around the mark with the cloth or the brush, around it, not over it. Don't scrape it. Don't dig at the old wood or stone while you're worked up. You're tending the space and getting your head steady before you decide what anything means here. Then stand at the entrance of the room with your house key in your hand. Touch the key to the door frame and say, or something like this, This is the way in. This is the line. What belongs here may enter in peace. What doesn't belong here stops at the door. Then you use the chalk or the little piece of brick or the pencil lead and make a small protective mark near the entrance. Keep it simple, a cross or an X or a circle, maybe a 5-spot pattern, or another sign from your own practice is enough. This is a house rule, not a decoration. You then set the piece of iron near the entrance overnight in a safe space where nobody will step on it or cut themselves. Iron has a long history in protection work because it's plain and firm and unfriendly to wandering trouble. If you use a candle, burn it safely near the entrance while you speak the rule. Keep an eye on it, and in the morning, move the iron to a quiet, permanent place near that doorway. It might be a drawer or a shelf or even above the door or behind a piece of furniture, somewhere safe. Then do one ordinary thing in the room. Sweep or open the curtains, or move the furniture around, or bring in a new lamp. Put the room back into daily use. So that's the spell. Look clearly, name things plainly, you guard the entrance, and bring the room back to the living. And remember the harder lesson. A mark can be a warning. It can be protection. It can be ordinary damage with a story wrapped around it. But when fear gets hold of it, it can become an accusation. So don't mock old protection work. Don't destroy what you haven't understood. And never treat a mark on another person's body like it tells you who they really are. I'm Papa G, and this has been the Feral Folklorist. Next time, we're talking about the Death Watch beetle and the old belief that a tiny tapping sound in the walls could mean death, and already making its way towards your house. Until next time, mind the marks you make and be careful who gets blamed for the story attached to them.
If you'd like to hear the After the Show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Aromages Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromages.com.